My name is Alexandra Pringle, and I am from London. I'm editor-in-chief of Bloomsbury Publishing, and we happen to be the very happy and proud publishers of two of the people on this panel today. So my heart is bursting with pride, actually. And I think that this afternoon we have perhaps the most frivolous event at the Lahore Literature Festival, and it is a celebration of all things Italian. So this is really a conversation about some of the glories of life. One of the things that I think is so interesting is that everybody on this panel comes from we come from the four corners of the world and are brought together by a common theme, which is that theme of the Italian life. So I will briefly introduce everyone, but just before I do that, I will tell you that when I was 21, I left England and went to live in Florence for a year, and it was one of the defining experiences of my whole life. I left behind a London that was grey and bleak and dreary in the extreme, and arriving in Italy in the 1970s, it was like an explosion and colour and beauty that I never got again until I came to this subcontinent. So there is a link there, and I have been drawn back ever since. So on my left is Kamin Mohammadi, whose book is the theme for this event. She is a journalist, a writer, a presenter. She wrote a book about her Iranian childhood, The Cypress Tree, which was a book about a great deal of sadness and loss. And happily, she has turned to something that has brought joy and light and life. And that is that she ran away to live in Italy a few years ago. And I have to say, she's never come back. And as a result, she wrote this marvelous book, Bella Figura. There are only 2 books that I've published where I have received endless emails from people saying, this book changed my life. It changed the way that I live. One is a memoir called Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert, and the other is Bella Figura by Kamin Mohammadi. So I think that we have a lot to thank both those women for. Then on her left is somebody I don't need to introduce to anyone from Lahore. Zahra is a great figure here, and she is actually the only person who brings to us today the true Italian experience, because she has an Italian grandmother who, who has brought so much of her heritage to this city and to this country. And she will talk about that and enrich us, and I can't wait to hear. I've also heard about the incredible delicatessen and the restaurants, and I wish I was staying here longer and could hang out more. And then on her left is Anissa Helou. So Kamin is from Iran, and Zahra, as you know, is from here and Italy, and Anissa is from the Lebanon, and she's been described as one of the most influential women of the Arab world. She is an incredible chef and food writer and journalist, and she knows everything about food from all over the world, the Mediterranean and the Middle East. And just recently, we have published an astonishing book on Islamic food from around the world called Feast. I actually met Anissa here at the Lahore Festival a few years ago, and so I have Lahore to thank for the fact that we have ended up publishing Anissa, which is a fantastic thing. And what Anissa has done is that she has gone to live in Italy. She lives now in Sicily. So everyone has much to say. But I thought we should kick off with Kamin telling us, what is the Bella Figura? I'm sure that if you've not read her book, you'll be dying to know. So Kamin.
Thank you, Alexandra. I think that probably all of you here from this wonderful country will have some kind of resonance with this idea of putting forward your best face. It's a little more profound than, let's say, the British concept of keeping up appearances. So the Bella Figura in Italy is very much about that. It's about making everything beautiful, making the beautiful figure. Now, I was very surprised when I was first there that actually even a really well-made street could be a Bella Figura, and a street full of potholes was brutta. So, you know, good beauty is also associated with goodness, and you know, and ugliness is associated with being bad. Now, I took this idea as I experienced it when I arrived 11 years ago for 6 weeks in Florence, as something that I found very informative. The people that I met said to me, talk to me about the Bella Figura, not so much as about being about the outside world, but very much about yourself. So I've really tried to put together that sort of idea of it in this book, which is about being as beautiful as you can be, inside, outside, whether you're alone, whether you're in company. And that's about how you treat yourself, how you behave also when you're alone, how much it's kind of self-respect, I suppose. I guess the buzzword now is self-care, self-love, what you know. But it's an entirely seductive and very old idea in Italy, which I hope I've wrapped up in sort of bows of sort of beautiful tomatoes and lovely olive oil, and made attractive and accessible to everybody.
Thank you. So, Zahra, I would love to know how your grandmother brought Italy to Lahore.
Well, she, you know, met my grandfather in England, in grey, rainy England, and fell in love with him, you know, many decades ago. And they had children together, they married, they had children together, and she moved here in 1965 with her 2 children, and made Pakistan her home, and, you know, lived here for her entire life and died here. And, you know, during her time here, maybe I should also tell people before I tell them a little bit about my grandmother that I never had the opportunity to meet her. She passed away before I was born, and I've often had this very surreal experience of being at a dinner party or being at a wedding and having people come up to me and tell me, oh, you're Paola's granddaughter. And, you know, for decades, since I was a little girl, I've, you know, heard about my grandmother, about, you know, so many people kind of connecting with her, and so many people thought that they were very close to her and were her friend. And, you know, we were always at your grandparents' house for dinner and at these parties, and they had the best parties, and it was a wonderful scene. And so I grew up with this idea of what she was, and never having known her. So there she was, landed here with 2 children, and, you know, made a very good life for herself. You know, she set up a restaurant, you know, serving European food back in 1969, and she brought an Italian ice cream machine to Lahore in 1968 before the restaurant. And, you know, a cone machine that made cones, and these were imported directly from Italy. So she literally brought a part of Italy here. And, you know, I was speaking with my aunt earlier today, and, you know, I said, just remind me of all those stories. And she said, you know, the thing that I remember the most is how we always had a very long dining table, and we never dined alone. There was always, you know, sort of this feeling that there'd be guests, so there'd always be enough food, and there'd be people every evening that were welcomed into the home and made to feel like they were part of the family, because that was just her way. So, so I guess that's very, very Italian, but I think it was also her fortune to come to a place that had a very hospitable culture. So not only did she bring Italy to, you know, to Pakistan, but also that the Punjab, where she came and where she made her home, was a place which was ready for that kind of warmth and love, because it was a place that was like that already. And so it was a meeting really of 2 very welcoming, open, and hospitable cultures for her in her life. And yeah, so I don't know how much of that is Italian and how much of that is her just being an Italian in an environment where there was just so much hospitality and love around her that it just kind of, it's hard to draw those boundaries, you know. So yeah.
And just tell a little bit more about, so there was a restaurant, and then what happened to them?
So there was a restaurant, and then, you know, obviously you know, I don't know entirely when it closed down, but she passed away when she was very young. She was 41. So after that, my mother, my aunt, and my uncle, about a decade and a half ago, were called upon by friends to cater parties, and they were just, you know, they'd grown up eating my grandmother's food, and she loved to cook, and, you know, she'd grown up around that atmosphere, and so they started cooking for their friends. You know, and it grew from cooking for like 20 people to being called upon to cook for 50, and then, you know, they had this big break where somebody said, well, you know, we have a 200 people dinner party, and please cook for us, and you cook the food. And so it was the three of them with like a motley crew of, you know, staff members, some of whom are still with us today, actually. And that's how the restaurant Cosa Nostra was born a decade and a half ago. And then, you know, it started by just them wanting to share the recipes of my grandmother and the food they'd grown up eating. And it just literally grew out of that impulse. And it was something that people related to. They loved the food. You know, it made them happy. So and it grew from there. And now we have 4 restaurants. And I'd like to think that each of those places has a little bit of her and that feeling of warmth and, you know, some of that love for food and passion for Italian, Punjabi love and life that she brought with her to this place.
Yes. Thank you. So, Anissa, what brought you to Sicily?
I wanted to leave London, but before, when I lived in London, I gravitated towards Italians, and I had great Italian friends, one of whom you met recently at her home in London, Ilaria. And I was thinking about leaving London, and I wanted to go to the sun, but I wasn't really thinking about Italy, because as much as I loved Italians, there was something about the cliquiness of life in Italy that didn't appeal to me that much. So I lived for a month in Rome, and it was like Beirut, you know, very kind of provincial without being provincial. If you belonged to a set of friends, you had to see them all the time, and it wasn't, you know, the freedom that I was looking for. Then I thought about California, and then I went one day to Mary Taylor Simetti, who's a wonderful writer about Sicilian food, to her olive harvest on her farm. And it was like a revelation. It was like going back to being at my aunt in Syria, because I'm half Syrian, half Lebanese. And, you know, the whole life, the seasonality, the kind of immediacy of like the produce on the farm, the beautiful weather, beautiful landscape, and the wonderful people, because they're very hospitable, very welcoming, like in Pakistan. And then I just, like, almost on a whim, I asked Mary to ask a friend of hers to find me a plot of land overlooking the sea. And she said, oh, well, I've got a friend who could help you. So I wrote him an email, and I said, whatever you do, find me a plot with a sea view. And then my brother said, why are you going to Sicily? Why don't you go to Tuscany? And I said, well, Tuscany is a bit too fancy, and Sicily is like going home without going home. There is no ISIS in Sicily. There is no, well, there is sexism, but but the landscape, the life, the way of life, the people, the beautiful produce, because the food is absolutely stunning there. So then that was like 6 months. I went back 6 months. I was renting a little house on my friend's farm. And the other friend said, okay, I have 3 plots for you. And he took me. The first 2 plots had a beautiful sea view, but they were pretty charmless. And I said, look, I'm not leaving London for a kind of normal place. I need to have something that is stunning, basically. And the 3rd plot, that was the first day. I mean, like, I didn't even go looking a lot. he took me up to Erice. Erice is a medieval town at the top of a mountain, a very ancient mountain. And I knew it, but as we were going up this winding road with beautiful sea views, I said to him, that's more like it. Then we arrived on the plot, and I said, okay, I'll buy it. And I did. But the story didn't really have a happy ending, because I was going to build this beautiful house that was going to be designed by Zahra, who was a friend of mine, and have a beautiful teaching kitchen and everything. But the bureaucracy in Sicily is something else. And so I still have my beautiful plot. I will kind of do it up. In the meantime, I bought a flat overlooking the sea in Trapani, which is exactly like Beirut, but a smaller, miniature version without the chaos of Beirut. And it's very sleepy and very provincial, but it suits me because I travel a lot. And I'm leading, I don't know if it's a Bella Figura life, but it's like a beautiful, there's something about Italy that you don't find in the rest of Europe. The people are very warm and very welcoming and very friendly. But there is a reserve that you find, like in France or in Italy or in Spain, and that it, differentiates them from the Arabs or the Iranians or the Pakistanis. They're welcoming, but they're not entirely open like we are, like we could invite somebody to eat with us if we meet them on the street. I don't think this happens that much in Italy. But it's very beautiful. It's like one of the most beautiful countries ever. I don't think there is a place, a little town you can go to without finding, a jewel historic center or a fabulous historic center like in Perugia and whatever. And of course the food. It's my passion and my profession. And it's everything that you can wish for.
So what is it about Italian food that's so special? Can you explain?
Well, first of all, it's very seasonal.
Yes.
So they're very ingredients-led and very seasonal, which brings it totally to where I come from. Very family-orientated. Like where I live in Trapani, everybody goes home to lunch and they lunch with their family, which hardly exists in London anymore, on a daily basis, not weekend or whatever.
Not even for dinner, I think.
And the simplicity of the food and the purity of the food. So they don't mix, if you're eating pasta in London, there'll be too much sauce. The pasta will not be al dente. In Italy, you have pasta with just enough sauce and not a mixed sauce. If you're having it with tomatoes, you might have aubergines with it, but it's a kind of very simple food, but totally exquisite, perfect. And the elaborate dishes are like the timballi of Sicily, for instance, which are like rice cakes or pasta cakes. They're very complicated and take a long time to prepare, but they're still fairly simple in the composition. So it is a kind of cuisine that is not showy, but that is perfect.
And that I think everyone can feel just about confident enough to cook.
Exactly.
Yes.
I think a lot of cuisines are terrifying to people, but Italian cuisine is so welcoming and makes you feel that however stupid you are, you could produce something that could work. But beauty, I think we should talk a little bit about beauty, because that's, as Kamin said, I'd love you to talk a bit more about that. The importance of beauty, because certainly for me, coming from a country where it was seen as being that if you cared about beauty, you were not serious, you were not intellectual, you were somehow idiotic and frivolous. And it was a completely extraordinary thing for me to go as a 21-year-old to a country where they felt that you had to present as beautifully as you could, that it was your duty to the world. And can you talk a bit about that? Because when you arrived in Italy, you were at quite a low point in your life, weren't you?
I was at a very low point, and I'd reached my dream career, right? So it hadn't turned out to be exactly what I dreamt of. And the flip side of it was that I worked terribly long hours, and my personal life suffered and just kind of withered away. And looking back on it, of course, it was a lot of the physiological effects that came with that were about the effects of long-term stress. And basically, I was burnt out. And it didn't matter what I did and what diet I followed and how many health gurus I had kind of, at my beck and call. I was a magazine editor, so it was very easy to access all of these things. Nothing really worked. So I went to Italy and I did everything I wasn't meant to. I ate pasta. I was told to drink fresh olive oil to help all sorts of digestive problems. So I thought, okay, I'm drinking oil. That's crazy. I did that. I made it my mission to try every gelateria in town, even though it was the winter. I just went, you know what, I'm just going to enjoy what's here. And I did all of that, and they absolutely had the opposite effect of what I was expecting. I think a lot because of what Anissa says, the purity of the ingredients, the simplicity of the food, the provenance, everything was grown near where I was buying it, and the seasonal effects. And at the same time, the beauty, absolutely the beauty. If anyone has been to Florence, then you will know that it's really, really, really hard to find any part of it that's not beautiful.
Yeah.
So, and man-made and natural, amazing light, incredible skies. In any season, I arrived in January and it was really cold and it rained a lot. Occasionally it snowed, but it was still just heart-burstingly beautiful all the time. And of course, the great thing about being there in January was that there was just many less people in the way. And the Italian attitude, the fact that I smile. Eventually, I learned to smile again. And that was one of the most stunning things, actually, that one of my friends said to me, who saw me after a few months. She said, "You're smiling again. You haven't smiled like in this radiant way for so many years," which was kind of miserable, really, to think of. Sort of pathetically sad I'd been in London. But there is what Alexandra mentioned, look, I'm a Londoner and I love it, but there is the drabness. And there is that idea that actually, yes, to be serious, you have to be drab. And you cannot be sensitive to beauty, not without being a sort of frivolous person or whatever. And to be in a place where, first of all, people would happily kind of go, oh, I can't come out today because it's raining and I kind of feel bad. And that was great. You were sort of had permission to allow your mood to go with what was being presented. And of course, what was being presented most of the time was just utter beauty, coming at you from every angle. And the fact that I feel almost like I absorbed that beauty and I kind of radiated it back out. And you know how Italians are, they're very enthusiastic. They try to walk down the street without someone going, Bella, And it really isn't about the way that you look. And it isn't about your age. It's 100% about the feeling that you're putting out there. It's about it's the Bella Figura, but I mean it in that deep way. It's radiating from the heart. So people seem to want to celebrate me just for existing. And that was really nice. And it was very healing, actually, at very deep levels, to my self-esteem, to all the things that had really taken a knock, and to the whole burnout thing. So I found it really restorative. And someone said to me one day, when I was very sad, they said, stay here and let the beauty heal you. And I think I hadn't quite allowed myself until then to be as moved and as affected and as sensitive to beauty as I think we probably all are to a very large extent. And, to have the Uffizi, the world's kind of one of the world's greatest museums sitting right there, 10 minutes away from my flat, to be able to go and sit there for a whole day and just look and absorb one extraordinary painting. I was really lucky, I had time. But I guess what I've tried to kind of impart in this book is that we can bring this into our lives, even if, we don't have weeks to take off, just to give ourselves these little pockets and these moments to allow, the beauty to heal us. And actually a way to take inspiration from the Italians to look for the beauty, to find the beauty, you know, to find the beauty in everything, in everyone, in everything that you eat, to have that enthusiasm, to really applaud and admire and be positive. I guess in the UK, we tend to be much more reserved than that. But coming from an Iranian background, an Iranian heritage, I have to say, like Anissa, I felt really at home there. I felt it, you know, and there was a sort of falling away of a lot of things that I'd been living with and constraining myself with in order to fit into British society for decades, that I was really happily able to just let go of. And there was a sort of return also to kind of how I'd grown up in Iran, you know, the markets, the seasonal produce, the importance, and family, yes, coming home for lunch, you know, everyone eating together, but also that thing where, you know, it was really exciting what was in season today.
Exactly.
Yeah? You know, we go to Iran and it's early September, and my aunts ring me and say, oh, fresh pistachios are in the market, you know. And actually I found the same thing in Florence, and I really valued that.
Zahra, a word you were using a lot, which I thought was really interesting, was the word happiness. And so it seemed to me that you felt that your grandmother, who you didn't know, but what she left was connected to happiness. Is that right?
Absolutely. I think also what became apparent to me as I was growing up here and meeting all these people is that that's what she brought to other people, is that just being able to feel included and to feel like you could share a meal with someone and then feel connected to them and feel like you were part of their family brings a level of happiness to your life, because everyone likes to feel included. Yeah. Everyone likes to feel loved, to be fed, to be taken care of. I think those are all very human, you know, sort of human instincts. And the fact that she did that for so many people, and for decades after she's been gone, I still meet people who tell me that they shared a meal with her,
yeah,
and that they were her friend, and people who probably don't think of me as my mother's daughter, but more as her granddaughter, even though she's been gone for so long, I think is a testament to the fact that clearly she created around herself an environment where people felt moved,
yes,
you know. And I think that, you know, partly when I was reading your book, what I felt really touched me and moved me was the fact that you give yourself permission to be moved. I think in life, so often we, you know, we have our blinders on and we have our routine. And like Kamin's book, you know, when she outlines her dreary life and how she like finally was able to break away from it, I think that we spend, you know, so much time going through the motions of life and the routine, and that we forget that actually, you know, all around us, there's so much to be thankful for, and there's so much beauty, and there's, you know, even in silly things you can find such a lot of pleasure, like a new pair of shoes, or a really great mango, and to allow yourself to be moved by those things is, I think, part of being, you know, happy. And I think it's very easy, and that's why you were referring to the self-care trend, and I think a lot of that is allowing yourself the time, yeah, to be moved by things.
Time, I think, is absolutely you've put your finger on something there, because everybody's lives, all our lives have speeded up so dramatically, and we all feel that we have to work 24 hours a day, that we're on email, we're accessible to people all the time. And so we, more than ever, I think, need to learn the Italian lessons of slowing down. You talk about slowing down a great deal. But one of the interesting things, though, about your grandmother, she was obviously a very good businesswoman as well. And I'm interested in that, how she brought together a sense of commerce and an ambition with those life-giving properties of Italy.
Well, she was, I guess, she must have been a really good businesswoman, because she made a lot of money. I mean, my grandfather really didn't need to work very hard. And she built a beautiful house in a very posh neighborhood, which my family inhabits to this day, I mean, with a swimming pool and everything. So, and they had a very fancy car. So I guess she was doing really well for herself, but I've never thought about it like that. I think also it was 1969. There was the novelty of having an Italian in Pakistan who was running a restaurant, who was always on the premises to laugh and chat and make you feel like, you know, you should come back for another ice cream or another pizza. So I think it probably was just that she was a force of nature, and so people naturally gravitated to her and around her product, I suppose. You know, what they say now in brand speak is like she was her product kind of a thing. So I think that she really was. She embodied her product. And so I think partly it was that, and partly I think that, you know, she got married very young. She was, you know, she was quite young when she moved here, and she had children, and, you know, she probably just kind of, you know, I guess we were talking earlier about the exchange between Pakistan and Italy. And I guess probably I would imagine that she came into her own as a woman and a businessman when she came here, business person when she came here. Because, I mean, she was just raising children before that. So clearly this place gave her that confidence, and maybe she felt appreciated enough, and that, you know, her food was appreciated. She thought that she could share it with more people and make lots of money doing it. I mean, I can't claim to know very much about her business dealings and, you know, whether she had a great accounts team or what the secret was. But I know for a fact that she did make a lot of money, and she was a very successful entrepreneur. So must have been something, you know.
I think it was the gelato machine.
Probably.
Which, but you all seem to have inherited as well, so it's gone down the generations.
Absolutely.
So sort of, I think that brings us to the matriarchal society. So there must be a link here. Anissa, do you feel that in your childhood, how important were women in your childhood, and how they behaved and how they worked, and how much of you?
Well, they were important from the point of view that they kept the home and the family. My father was away a lot for business, and we were always with my mother and grandmother, and with my aunt in Syria, again alone. So it was always women, and we were like 4 girls and 1 boy, and we tortured him a little bit. They were not important on a professional level, and that was one thing that I resented, because from very young I wanted to be independent and work and not rely on men for my, you know, livelihood. But they instilled, for instance, the love of food in me long before I even considered a career in food. But much more important, there was the love and the care and the attention and the keeping the family together. So my father was a very kind of austere, important, impressive figure who came in and out of our lives and looked after us and everything, but he wasn't the man who formed us, or at least part. I mean, you know, my desire for a profession came from my father, but also it came from my mother, who resented the fact that she wasn't allowed to have a professional life and to develop herself the way she would have wanted to. Because she was an incredibly talented woman, not only in the kitchen, but everything she did with her hands was absolutely fabulous. And she was also very intelligent, but not educated. So I think they had the typical traditional role in a patriarchal society, because it's not a mix, where they were very important and very respected and gave a lot to the life of the family, but not outside the family.
And how and when did you learn to cook?
Well, I actually resisted cooking for a long time, because I was reading the French existentialists, and I imagined a completely different life for myself. And when I first lived, the first and last man I ever lived with, actually, because after that I was cured. The first thing I said to him, I said, "Don't expect me to cook for you." But I repeat the story all the time. and I was very much of a feminist. It was the 70s, early 70s, so feminism was, you know, big, and Simone de Beauvoir was my idol and my role model. But then he invited this very glamorous American woman to our home and asked me what was for dinner. And being a bolshy young thing, I said, well, open the fridge and see what's for dinner. And then she cooked the dinner. And then my feminism was like completely disappeared. And I was looking at them and thinking, maybe I should start cooking, or I should do something. And then I cooked a dinner party, Lebanese dinner party, for 30 people. It was 1974 or 76. At the height of the Civil War, without the possibility of contacting my mother, because for 6 months there were no communications between London and Beirut. But being very stubborn, and also immodest, because I thought I could pull it off, I thought, I'm going to do it. And I scoured London for fresh parsley, flat leaf parsley, not even curly parsley, olive oil, you know, tahini for the hummus and all this. And I thought, you know, I'd spent all my life being my mother's and my grandmother's kitchen pest, so I should be able to do it. And in fact, I did. I produced a dinner party, Lebanese dinner for 30 people. I don't know if it was good or not, because they were all foreigners and they didn't know Lebanese.
That's the best. That's the best. They appreciate your cooking so much.
But it was, I mean, it wasn't a disaster. I put the food on the table. Everybody was happy. And from that day on, I didn't cook domestically because I still resisted, but I did cook for dinner parties. And slowly I got more and more. I went to live in Paris. Of course, this was very important. I had a great friend in Paris who was a marvelous cook, so I learned from her. And I started cooking occasionally. And then one day I remember cooking, you know, a fantastic meal from the Trois Gros brothers in London, and thinking, you know, I shouldn't be wasting my time in the kitchen. And if I am, it should be my profession. But even then, it took another 10 years before I decided, by chance, to make it my profession.
So shall we talk a bit about other aspects of the Bella Figura? Obviously, food is right at the center of it, but there are other aspects. And you talked about beauty. One of the things that interests me about Italians is that it seems to me they know a lot about their culture, that they've been brought up with it. Certainly in the UK, people, I think, know very little about, you know, what's in their local churches, you know, what the architecture of where they live and so on. But would you talk a little bit about that?
I think it's about connection, and which I think in different ways we've all been really mentioning, right? And there's this sense of connection to the earth, connection to their food, connection to the past, connection to the land. So, I mean, Italy has been much invaded, you know, and it's not a very cohesive country. So I live outside of Florence, and we have one village that's maybe 3 kilometers that way, and another village that's maybe 5 kilometers that way. And they feel vastly different to each other. They have slightly different cuisines. They say, oh, but those people...
All think they're superior
yeah,
to the one down the road.
Sure. Oh, but those people think they're like this. Oh, but those... But actually, it's something about that kind of tribalism, I think, as well, that is very grounding there somehow for people. And, you know, the other aspect of it, we've mentioned sometimes it feels like provincialism, right? But the positive aspect of that is just that absolute connection to kind of where they're from and that land.
And also their pride.
Absolutely, you know, and you know,
they're very, very proud of being Italian. And
yeah.
I don't feel, I mean, I haven't come across that level of just being, you know, I'm Italian and I love my country and it's so beautiful and come, let me show you. It's rare.
Yes, but you know, Antonella, who's in my book, she said many wise things, and one day she said to me, listen, you know, we were once great, we had the Roman Empire, we did this and that, you know, what do we have now? Berlusconi at the time. And she went, well, we have our lifestyle. Yes. That is really what we have left. I mean, in a way, it's like that's what's kind of reduced down to, you know, it was the Romans who who invented the summer holiday, they invented villas by the sea, you know, the place where they would go and have their villas, you know, the coast down towards Napoli, is still where they go. There is something that's really unchanged, you know, in Italy for thousands of years. And they are very proud. They're extraordinarily proud, and they're very well received. Let me say this as an Iranian person who's lived in the West and is called Mohammadi for 40 years. You know, people often take a step back when they understand where I'm from, depending on where they're from. But when I travel anywhere with my Italian husband, I mean, people practically throw garlands at his feet, you know. They just, being Italian is, people love it, you know. And I think that, great, right? And I think to have also that amount of positivity coming back at you for who you are and what you've given the world, you know, not just pasta, pizza, but also kind of all the amazing cars, the design, fashion. You know, there are very, very positive things associated with Italy, you know, the extraordinary art, the Renaissance, blah, blah, blah. We could go on. So I don't know if that's the reason, but that's certainly, you know, thinking about it, that seems to be behind it. And there is a kind of confidence, I think, that Italians have that for somebody who's a displaced person is extraordinarily attractive, right? That here we are, this is where we're from, I know who I am, I know what's behind me, you know, I don't necessarily know what's in front, but you know, this is it. And they're very positive in that respect.
And what about the passeggiata? The passeggiata is the most extraordinary thing that happens in even the tiniest village in Italy, that come the evening, everybody puts on their most beautiful clothes and they get out into the streets. So if you're in France and you're in a village, the shutters come down and everybody disappears, and you could be in a war zone that, you know, everybody just has gone underground. But in Italy, you know, everybody is out in the streets, and from the north of Italy right down to the tip. And it's all about showing yourself, and the bambini in their pushchairs, all in their frills and their little shoes and their bows, and every woman and every man. And it's like the most incredible theatre, isn't it? So how come the passeggiata? What is this strange thing?
Do you know, I don't know.
Does anyone
know? You know, I noticed we have a version of it in Iran, actually. Less in Tehran, where it's, you know, way more crowded and people do it in cars. But, you know, in the...
Even here in Liberty Market, you have it happening in the cars,
right,
for sure,
there's a bit, you have in the smaller towns in Iran, you have it too. You know, people go up and down and look at each other.
Beirut was, when I went, my son lived in Beirut for 5 years, and I went there twice a year, and I loved the thing that you'd be out in the street and everyone would look at everybody else, and that kind of extraordinary display. But I think that for me, Italy has it more than anywhere I've ever been in the world. And it's a kind of madness, and it's so much fun.
Theatre is so good, though, Alexandra. I feel like Italian cities are built like outdoor theatres, aren't they? They're stage sets, and everyone goes and plays their part.
But also there is something about the passeggiata that I notice in Trapani, is that that's where the meeting place. So, you know, they're working all day, they lunch with their families, and at the end of the day, they go out, and in small towns like Trapani, everybody knows everybody, and you cannot, like, walk 10 steps without seeing somebody you say hello to. And I think they want that. So they go out to walk and to show off, but also to say hello and to communicate.
It's very sociable.
So it's about community,
isn't it? It is about community.
So the food is about community, the passeggiata is about community. So I think that we're putting our fingers on something. So Sicily, of course, I've only been to Sicily once, but it's a wild place, isn't it? It's like Italy in the extreme, which oddly reminds me a little bit of Beirut, that you feel everyone is living as if it might be the last day on this world, in this world, so you have to live every day so fully. Is that how you...
It is. It is an extraordinary place. It's kind of a slightly contradictory place, but it is wild from the point of view that, in a way, you think, like coming from London, it's as if I've stepped back 10 or 20 years, because their way of life is completely different from either Paris or London, or I say even Milan or Rome. it's much slower, it's much more community-led. They're still very community-led. And then, of course, you have the mafia.
I think we have to talk a little bit about the mafia because, you know, we're painting a very rosy picture, but behind all of this is something more sinister.
Well, when I decided to buy in Sicily, because I had actually pinpointed Sicily, my friend Ilaria said, wherever you want to buy, don't go there, which was where I ended up. And it is true that there is a little village not far from Trapani, famous for its cannoli. It's called Datilo. It's really ugly. It's tiny. There's nothing happening there. But it's a mafia heartland. And I felt it without knowing it. And then when I went back with my Sicilian friend, he pinpointed me the men who wear the mafia. So it's very present. Yeah. It's threatening, but on a bigger level, not on an individual level. So they're involved in government, in big construction, you know, roads, government projects, whatever. But as a kind of foreigner living in Trapani, I do feel one thing that is negative is that they take advantage of the ignorance of the foreigner. So if you're not protected by, you know, a husband or friends or whatever, you might get ripped off here and there. I guess not on a big level until, I mean, I didn't build my house, mainly also because of that. But, you know, it is a hazard of living in Sicily. But the beauty of the island, the hospitality and the warmth of the people, and the pleasure of the way of life there, makes up for it.
Absolutely. The mafia is, you can encounter them in all sorts of, but you know, when you speak to Italians, particularly in the south, not just Sicily, but also Calabria, Napoli, you know, they have all their different...
Puglia, where we are.
And Puglia. They will say to you, you know, the mafia, what mafia? The mafia is the state. So it's exactly as Anissa says, you know, they're into, now they're controlling immigration because it's become bigger business than anything else, which
they're
is
also
horrific.
Controlling food, by the way. I mean, some food. But they are much bigger.
Yeah, they're not sort of on an individual, although we had a holiday once in Calabria in a very tiny place. And in Calabria, you really see it. It's beautiful naturally, but it doesn't have those extraordinarily theatrical, beautiful towns. You see a lot of half-built buildings along the coast, you know, and this is all to do with tricks, to getting funding and whatever. We were in this very small town, and we did genuinely see, like, the good fellas walking down the street one day, you know, collecting, calling into all the shops, and but it's a kind of weird part of the system also.
Yeah, I mean, I think some people for instance, in Palermo and outside Palermo, they have circumvented the mafia by creating corporations. Yeah. So farmers group together and they decide not to go.
Big movement.
The same in Palermo with restaurants or businesses. And so it's not going away, but it's being resisted. And of course, the government is trying to clean it up, not very successfully in some cases. But it's part of the fabric of the land.
Alexandra, if I may,
yes.
I just want to say also that there's four of us on this stage right now. None of us is technically Italian, and we're having a conversation about Italy. And I just wanted to spend a minute to talk about also the fact that we're female. And I mentioned earlier that Italy is something that I think is a particularly sensual, you know, I mean, other words can be used, but it's a place that has a particular resonance for women in particular. And here we are from 4 different parts of the world, and we're not Italian, and we have a lot to say about Italy. And I was wondering whether we could spend a little time talking about why that kind of feeling is created in women everywhere for this country, and what that means,
and
really.
Why do you think? Yeah.
Well, I think it's got a little bit to do with what we were talking about earlier, that the culture allows you to inhabit your I suppose, femininity and indulge in being silly and beautiful and appreciating, and taking time out, which maybe women don't get told in other cultures to do as much. But I don't know, what do others think?
I agree with that. I think you're also celebrated for it. This idea that I could have my moods and be passionate, and I didn't always have to be this quite reasonable English kind of type person, was really liberating. Realizing that actually it's okay if you shout, because everyone does, and then everyone gets over it. But I've really noticed it's such a good point, because in Florence in particular, I meet time and again women who genuinely go to Florence and have a renaissance, in smaller or bigger ways. I've met so many different women from all over the world. Even Hanan, we were speaking some time ago, and she went for 2 weeks, and she had a kind of renaissance from a sort of a kind of depression that she was in, and it happens to people who over longer periods, and I can only call it a renaissance because in Florence that really seems to be what it's all about.
I have a colleague who read Kamin's book and then immediately booked a weekend in Florence. So it was that direct.
I honestly have to say, right now there are 4. I know there's two from the UK, one from America, and one from Prague.
Yeah.
And I call them my Bella Figura, readers who've read my book and gone. I mean, I don't know if they're going to stay permanently. I feel slightly responsible. They all seem to be thriving, but they've all kind of gone, I'm going to take inspiration, and I'm going to go to Florence. And they genuinely are all having this renaissance.
Yes.
And occasionally I meet them,
Yeah.
and I invite them over for lunch, and I call them my Bella Figura. And it just seems like it's very available.
Yeah. And Lisa, do you think it's a female thing?
I think there is what is important in Italy, or what is interesting in Italy, is that the woman is important to the life.
That's what I meant about the
of Italians.
matriarch.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the mother is sacrosanct.
Yes.
And the wife is as well, even if they betray the wife,
But they never get divorced.
they don't. And they respect the wife
Perhaps they
very
should.
much. And so the woman is an important element of society, even if they are sexist in some parts, but it's not the same in England, and it's not the same in France. You don't have, it's like a matriarchal society without the full power.
Yes, it's a celebration, isn't it? The relationship with the mother is so different,
And so important.
And so important.
I did though when I taught in a school in Italy for a year, and I used to have these young men, and they all had exquisite white socks, and I would look at those socks and I thought, you're all living at home. Sure. Your mama is doing your washing for you.
Well, that's it.
But
That's
I really
the flip side.
disapproved of that.
But that's another thing.
Mamoni.
That's another thing that Pakistani, Punjabi men have in common with, because behind the backs of rickshaws it says "Mawa Thandiyan Chawa," which means a mother is like the cool breeze of heaven. So there is. I mean, I think that there is. We all come from societies, I think, as coming from where mothers are very important, and I think that is another kind of thing that leads us into that particular culture, you know.
So are there any questions? Yeah. No, I think that they have different status in different societies, actually. I think that I really believe that there's some where motherhood is a bigger aspect of people's life and then recognized by society more. But that's just my opinion. Are there any other questions? We've got a few minutes. If anyone would like, from the fount of wisdom from these women, just here.
It's on? Okay, great. Carmen, thank you so much. I thank you all the panelists. It's been just such a tremendous 1 hour just to listen to all of you. It's really been brilliant. Carmen, something that you just said a few minutes ago, which is that all these four women who have sort of come to Florence and are experiencing Renaissance. Geography and weather. Do you think that's the key? Because what about Lahore? Do you think we can have a Renaissance here?
Do you know, I long to stay longer in Lahore and be able to answer that question. So I think that, everywhere has its own particular charm. And Italy, but there's something, there's Italy, but I've got to speak about Florence, I think. that there's something about it's the weather, the people, the food, the whatever it is, that really just seems to give this sense of healthy confidence to women. You know, women, I'm going to say women. I have male readers. They write to me just to say, by the way, I'm a male reader. And I really liked it too, which I'm really grateful for. But I have to speak, you know, my Bella Figura, they all happen to be women. They're all thriving. I'm absolutely delighted, you know. And I'm long may it last, you know. And I've tried also to think, you know, we can't all give up our lives and go and move to, you know, Florence or Anissa, you know, you live on the birthplace of Venus, you know that, right? Erice is supposed to be where she was born, so the beauty and the love and all of that. So we can't all do that or come and stay in Lahore for longer, as much as we'd love to. So what I've tried to also do in this book is make it practical. So I've tried also to give ideas that you can take to wherever you are, whether you're in Lahore or Luxembourg or, you know. And actually, I've got some little postcards that Bloomsbury very happily, sweetly made up. So if anyone wants to pick up, this is just a little boiling down of the Bella Figura tips, of just things that I discovered through that year of living in, the first year, 11 years ago, of living in Florence, that I think made me feel better, that I think would make everybody feel better. And they're all very, very tiny and simple things that you can do anywhere in the world, and they will all help, I hope, I think, I believe, to incrementally help make daily life much more joyful, which, you know, at the end of the day, this is what Zahra was saying as well, we can't always, you know, influence what's going on a bigger scale in our lives, but we can choose to find the joy and the beauty anyway. So I hope that I've given some practical advice about that too. So maybe, you know, hopefully it's not just geography.
And I think, Zahra, perhaps you're the person to know whether it can be brought to Lahore.
Well, I mean, I don't know. It's an experiment in progress. I'll get back to you.
I think that in terms of the passeggiata, we were at a party last night, and I have never seen so many beautiful women in the most astonishing shoes and incredible clothes. So I thought, this is the best passeggiata I have seen since I was last in Italy. It was such a joy.
Hello.
I think we've got maybe time for one more question.
Yeah, I want to
Yes.
it's a comment more than a question. It was wonderful to spend 1 hour over here talking about Italy from people who were, none of them were Italians, but yet they talk about Italy and the food so well that you really want to go to Italy now and enjoy Italian food. So thank you so much, all of you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Just one more. And then one more, yeah.
Being maybe the only Italian man in this. Actually, we are two, and the second one is better than me. Where is Demetrio? Where is the thick guy there? I want just to say something that is amazing, the perception that foreigners have. And that doesn't match exactly with the picture that we have of ourselves. But it's extremely interesting. That's why I didn't put any question on what you said, because I think it's your perception. So it's very interesting. Mine, that is not exactly like we think. About a concept of commonplace. Many things that you said are commonplace. But why they are commonplace? They are not a negative thing. A commonplace is something that actually happened. That's why it becomes a commonplace. But there is a very nice thing I suggest everybody to see. Please look it in YouTube. It's called Italy, the extraordinary commonplace. It will give you an impression. Please do it. Promise.
Okay,
yeah?
thank
you promise?
you.
Italy, the extraordinary commonplace is a documentary. I think it lasts 2 minutes or 2 minutes and a half, but it's amazing. And you will learn something about it.
Thank you. I'm
Thank you
afraid
for
our
attention.
time is up, so I would just like to say thank you to these 3 utterly inspirational women. May we all take from what they have said and enrich our lives, and may they all have a little bit more Bella Figura. Thank you.
Thank you.